And it's not right to expect every leader to be able to see everything. So I really think the partnership model and the collaborative model that catalysts typically bring is an advantage, not, just a band-aid.
Hi, I'm Tracy Lovejoy.
And I'm Shannon Lucas. We are the co-CEOs of Catalyst Constellations, which is dedicated to empowering catalysts to create bold, powerful change in the world.
This is our podcast, Move Fast, Break Shit, Burn Out, where we speak with Catalyst executives about ways to successfully lead transformation in large organizations.
And I am thrilled today to have time with Elizabeth Manning. Welcome.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Elizabeth is a transformation catalyst who has repeatedly shattered traditional career boundaries in the global pharma industry for 17 years. Her superpower, connecting seemingly unrelated dots with surgical precision and artistic creativity in the relentless pursuit of what's possible. She transforms the most complex challenges into pioneering solutions, fundamentally reshaping team collaboration and industry-wide innovation. Her multidimensional approach blends design thinker with organizational therapist. I loved that framing so much. Unleashing potential in leaders and cross-functional teams. Buckle up, Elizabeth doesn't maintain systems. She revolutionizes them, driving both cultural transformation and business results for the win-win-win. I'm so excited for this conversation today. But let's start off, that's the high level, but we'd love to hear about your journey through the lens of being a catalyst, maybe some of the things that you're proud of that help us see your catalytic nature.
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. I'm excited to be here, very much so, because like you said, we have to be able to change the system so it can work better for us instead of Trojan horsing everything, like I call it, where you have to sneak in and change without them noticing. Like, we really need to be able to thrive. So my journey actually started pretty randomly. I was a dancer and choreographer first and thought that was my career. And I had day jobs. And one of my day jobs was just an administrative role in a pharma company. And while I was there, my body decided it wasn't going to be able to dance for long term with my back and my knees collapsing. So I just had to pivot and say, is there something here that I can make out of this? And I had a conversation with the manager. I was overqualified for an admin role, but I said, what if I keep adding value, because I had already started finding new ways and new questions, and you promised to challenge me, and we just see what happens. And he bit. Every role after that role for 17 years, every 2 years approximately, a new role was created for me out of the new value proposition that I was able to discover and then deliver. And then they realized, oh, this is important. So let's institutionalize it. And then I moved on, obviously, to the next. So I really turned into that go-to person through a progression of project management type solutions. And then there was a turning point when I was working with a cross-functional team who was responsible for the largest global epilepsy regulatory submission that had been to date. And our chief medical officer came to the team and said, you have to accomplish it in half the time. So a 12-month usual, which was hard to do anyways, you had to do in 6 months. And yes, Christmas was in there. So was in the 6 months. It was impossible. Everyone knew it was impossible. I ended up pulling from design thinking, as I kind of alluded to. I pulled from some project management principles. I pulled from my background in interpersonal communications. I pulled from emotional intelligence and really guided that team to a reimagination of all the processes. And I was doing this from a coordinator role, to be clear. They reimagined their processes because we opened up the safe space for them to switch from a functional escalation model, which was much more the traditional specialized, you check with your manager, cut off 5 days, come back. I got them to create a shared accountability approach and got them to feel safe with each other to brainstorm the what's possible without the limitations of what's realistic yet. And when they started doing that and started feeling safe with each other, they came up with solutions that totally changed everything. And we hit the 6 months with 1 week to spare,
Wow.
even over the holidays. And that was a huge pivot for me because there was a lot of visibility, very high profile, and a lot of functions are involved in that kind of work. So they started to realize they can trust me to guide them towards the impossible. How do we solve when it really does feel impossible? They also saw the necessity of reimagination,
Mm.
which then validated the approach I typically come from with questioning things.
Mhm.
Is there a different way? How else could we do this? What else could we do with this? It used to be annoying. And now that it delivered this kind of result, then all of a sudden there was a lot more buy-in. So that accelerated my growth, and it accelerated me becoming a go-to person when those shifts were needed. So when the industry shifted, they would come to me and pair me up with a physician or a PhD and say, you guys go figure this out. What are we going to do in response to this? Or what's the next move that we need to get ahead of? So I did data sharing, I did patient engagement, digital business transformation, DE&I, employee engagement and activation. So I ended up in all those spaces as that catalyst that helped pull the pieces together that were never touching to see what was slipping through the cracks and to see the opportunity that could never be realized without bringing those pieces together. The puzzle, the whole puzzle, you're missing all the connecting little joints, the little, round pieces. It's like the culture had cut those pieces off and they need them to connect. So people like us see that and have to figure out how to make them see that. But it
Oh,
was fun and it was hard. Yeah, all at once.
so much to respond to. And thank you for the story. And it really, I think it's such a great example that demonstrates the power of tapping catalysts and the innate skills that they have to solve wicked big problems. And you outlined a number of like the key skills, like creating a sense of safety, being able to use your EQ to manage and, bring people along and all of that stuff. We could spend a whole conversation talking about that, but what is super interesting is about like the personal branding that you got known for and the fact that you kept having to sort of like articulate or pitch your next role or create clarity about like how in this next problem solving where you were going to sit in the organization and what that looked like. And
Yeah.
I remember when I got picked to do the innovation program, my boss was like, this might have a 2-year lifespan. Like you might not have a job after this. Do you want to do this crazy thing? And I was like, yes, please. But for me, I didn't have to create that role. Subsequently, I did. But it's something that I think more catalysts should think about
Yeah.
is like helping companies understand the value and actually pitching how they can best help. So how did you do that? I mean, I hear you also
Yeah.
got results. So like, let's not forget that part.
No. Well, and I think that is actually, it's a laughable, but it is a key element of it. It's also a key risk that looking back on it, I make sure people are aware of when they're hearing my story, because one of the problems for me was that I was always solving a new problem, then the role was created. So what happened was at first I was like, this is awesome. I'm getting rewarded for what
Yeah.
I've accomplished. But
Yeah.
at a certain level, when I should have been 2 levels higher in terms of organizational, the types of decisions I'm making, the types of, executive thinking and activities that I was managing, I wasn't able to get there because the policies in the organization were that you can't jump more than 2 levels at any given promotion. And you can only get promoted on these cycles and blah, 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 blah. At the end of the day, I never fully recalibrated to where I actually deserved to be in terms of pay grade, in terms of level of authority and decision making responsibilities that matched up. So I want to make sure that's clear as a risk for this approach. But one of the key aspects was create, and I didn't realize this at the time, getting an advocate in HR and visibility with HR, particularly to one, the benefits person, and two, just someone that is your lead at the site that can see you visibly in the space locally, but also start seeing you globally and realizing that that's different than
Mm,
the typical whatever your role usually is.
mhm.
But really, it was the benefits person that kicked the whole journey off because she told me, we need to reassess your role at this point because what I'm seeing you do is far beyond what is appropriate within an admin role. So she started the process of assessing. She said, write out everything you do, which of course is the most daunting thing to ask someone like us to do. It's like, just forget it. I'll quit. But I did it. And that started the process of us being able to create a new role. And that's one of the things I'm proudest of because that role actually did get institutionalized. That
Nice.
first role was the missing piece for non-traditional generalist type of talent within a hugely specialized organization. There was zero career path for anyone that wasn't a scientist, a physician, a data, IT, very structured functions. This created the first. So office managers started getting career paths and administrative assistants, and we created this project management type of role that was outside of the study project manager. And that created career paths for people in all different directions in the organization, and it still exists. But it also inspired specialists, which I thought was one of the coolest things for me when people, they're experts, world experts, coming and saying, you're inspiring me because I never would have thought to connect this with that. And I'm really passionate about that. I'm kind of curious about that. I didn't realize there could be an opportunity for me to explore that until
Nice.
they saw it getting done. And so I was then coaching, people 4 levels up from me, just brainstorming how they could put different pieces of their skill sets and their passions together to see what new value they could offer. And so that grew. But that was the initial process. And then from there, it was okay, you solved this problem, you evolved it, and then you get to the end of the year, you try to do your end of year reviews. None of your objectives from the beginning match what you actually did. How do we solve this? Oh, we create a new role. So that was what happened for probably 3 or 4 rounds of the evolution until finally at the end, the person that had really been sponsoring me in essence the whole time kind of said, I need you to do change for the digital business transformation, the board reporting, the this, the that. I'm just going to call it strategic initiatives lead so we can stop. That was where I landed and partnered with the executive committee, partnered with steering committees, advised, created a whole training structure for other change managers, developed, different infrastructure. So that worked the best. And I would make that recommendation to anyone trying to do it to go ahead and think generally once you've established yourself as that go-to, because then they can actually see the necessity for the diversity within a role. And then you can create specific actions and measures for it.
So much to respond to. Strategic initiatives lead is so fascinating because it's like, instead of, let me see if I have this right, just for clarification, instead of creating like the role for each project that is then time bound and all of that, there was a recognition that having this generalist with all of the skills that you articulated as like a resource that the organization can tap into for subsequent strategic initiatives was a epiphany for them. Is that what I
Yes,
heard?
very
Yeah.
much so. And I became that person then, enterprise level risk management. You're our representative. Anything that was in that cross-functional, cross-disciplinary space, I was then the perfect person for that. And I partnered well with the chief of staff for the organization that my position actually sat within. So it was also really helpful for that person who's in charge of kind of seeing what's going on, but never has the bandwidth to actually drive the strategy for it all. So it was a good way of flow insights from other groups, insights to other groups. And then, for instance, in the risk management, I joined that committee, Shannon, and I sat there in the first meeting and said, I think this is the first time where I might be saying, who is this? Why am I here? Why are you at the table? Because
Fascinating.
the level of specialization that they were talking about,
Yeah.
I had not been exposed to, nor honestly did I want to be exposed to the depth that I was hearing about it. So I started asking questions. I can't get into the weeds of what you're talking about, but what I'm seeing is, where's the connection between this and this? You seem like you're talking about the same thing, and when we talk about a trial, why only one function has it, but then three other functions are seemingly replicating that, because it's also a risk in technology, it's also a risk in IT. So I ended up being that person that at first I thought I was way out of my league, and ended up being the one that was the most visionary and helped them really rethink about risk management at an enterprise level.
That's right.
So we
It's a
totally
systems level
abort
approach,
yeah,
right?
we
Yeah.
totally went away from the functional only um, risks and decided this committee was really for that enterprise level. How do we redefine those so that we can work together towards the same objective, so that we can mitigate and inform? And yeah, it was crazy. So for me, I was like, this is obvious. Why are you why are you not doing it? But it ended up positioning me as a really important strategic leader on that organization, because again, they're all from that functional specialized traditional model. They're amazing in their own rights and in that specialization. But the systems thinking beyond their function was, one, not normal, and two, they honestly didn't have the privilege, the luxury of
That's
being
right.
able to think about everybody else. It's just, there's
Yeah.
so much. And it's not right to expect every leader to be able to see everything. So I really think the partnership model and the collaborative model that catalysts typically bring is an advantage, not, just a band-aid. I think that's a good model of partnering.
Totally agree. I'm gonna recap a little bit and then I have some specific follow-ups I want to talk about. But so one of the things that we're talking about right now is the difference between when people think about organizational structures. Like the old model is like you'd have an org structure and you'd build it in concrete and cement, and it was like, that would be the way that the organization was supposed to work for the next 3 to 5 years strategic cycle or whatever. And the way that we're thinking about it now is actually you have to have Legos. It's a Lego structure, because you have to be able to, and this is what sounds like you do, is like pick up pieces of these skill sets and the cross-functional teams, and like, okay, we're going to pull these Legos over here now to solve this problem. And then you go back and have that agility. There's some interesting questions there, though, or some challenges that I'm guessing you encountered. One is, how do we articulate value? And this is a challenge we know that catalysts have, because we are both the convener, so it often feels inauthentic to be like, and this team created $1 billion product, and you're like, all I did was facilitate, right? And we're often so in service of it that it feels disingenuous to even talk about the value, or it happened after we left. So like, one is, how did you articulate the value? The next is connected to that. Like, how do you find executive sponsors who, especially in kind of maybe cement operating silos right now, understand that value and can advocate for it? And the third one you talked about a little bit is like the imposter syndrome. Like, as we're creating these new roles or getting pulled into new roles where we don't have the domain expertise, and actually the value is as a generalist, but like, I'm guessing the risk people at the beginning, you're like, I don't know about risk. And they're like, we don't know about you. So,
Yeah.
so those are three things I'd like you to unpack, because I think that this is it's a real ambition for Catalyst to be able to do what you did, but I'm guessing that there were challenges in those areas along the way.
I'll start from the last, and then I'll ask you to remind me the other two
Sure, of
as we
course.
go.
Yep.
I think with the risk one, and to clarify it, I was coming in as the representative for all of clinical development. So if anyone knows anything about research, clinical development is huge and hugely regulated. Everything has to be systematic, repetitive, repeatable, all of that. And so here I am, the dancer, the creative, all of that representing that group, which was an interesting evolution anyways. But it does speak to where that sponsor, so I'll tease that answer, where that sponsor was visionary in and of herself to,
Mhm.
to latch on to me as the representative of that part of the group. So within that space, how did that happen? I think what's really big on the imposter syndrome for me is when I went to HR and I could get the paper that said, here, because they have it, they have an outline of the types of accountability, the types of responsibility, the types of competency that mirror every grade level. And when I got that and was able to review it and see, oh, wait, I'm doing this.
Mm.
I'm not doing support, help, follow on, follow up, edit. I was creating and I was guiding and I was facilitating and I was challenging and I was getting the important conversations to be had. I was finding the root causes that were actually the problems and avoiding us, spending time in the symptoms. So that really helped me get the arsenal. The other thing that was outside of the company, I had a mentor that told me, you're a rock in their shoe and they don't want a rock in their shoe. So you just need to know that. And I thought, I'm going to prove them wrong. And I didn't prove him wrong. They most didn't want a rock in their shoe, but I was a good one. So I think part of that was he suggested I take the Strengths Finder, which was the 1.0 at the time. But
Mhm.
that also helped me a lot because it really gave language that I could feel substantiated what I bring in a professional setting, especially as a dancer and a
Mhm.
communications background.
Mhm.
Those were things that aren't hugely thought of as respectable in a pharma space. So it really helped me start to see, okay, intuition is an actual skill. I can say that out loud. I can say my intuition is one of the strong suits rather
Yeah,
than trying to dance around it because of fear that people see it as too fluffy.
right.
So like you said, when you can combine that with the conversation you are able to help people have, they see it. And when you see them see it, you realize, okay, I'm
The
actually
value
doing
there.
this. Like,
Yeah,
this is me.
totally.
This is legit. They're shifting. So yeah, that really helps. So I would say really getting that HR, like I said at the beginning, that HR partner. Like I said, it was not intentional. I didn't realize it until looking back, but those were key advantages, having that relationship.
Yeah. So repeating that back, role clarity, which even if it's like not the hard tech skills, but like what you are supposed to be doing. Having a mentor who can help you see what your role is for better or worse and being able to embrace that sort of the self-awareness and the self-evaluation, like, the strengths finder is a super good one, but it's like, what are my superpowers? And then and we work with Catalyst a lot. We're teaching a class on this in a couple of weeks. Like, how do you create a personal brand and articulate your value as a catalyst? Because if you can understand how other people are articulating your value when you're not in the room, that's a great thing for you to be able to do. So those are
Yes.
the two starting points that I had. Like, how did you articulate your value, and how did you find an exec sponsor, and how did they articulate your value?
Yeah. A big pivot was one year I was invited to the leadership forum, which was the executive committee and then the N-1s globally. They came together once a year to really hone in on the strategies, the key objectives, that kind of thing for the next year. Every year they invited different people as representatives of different themes that they were going to be focused on. That year they invited people they thought were solid representatives of the culture they want to evolve
Nice.
into and how bringing that culture to life really looks versus, the slide sets and all of that and speaking the
Yeah.
word. So I
Cool.
was one of the few that came for that purpose. But what it did for me, having access to that conversation was a game changer.
Mm,
When I could hear how they at that level really talked about things and what was really important and what questions they were really digging into and what they were kind of not digging into. And then seeing them define what they expect as outcomes to things. That was a game changer for me. I went from driving everyone crazy that managed me with a 12-page year-end review because I had to explain every little thing and its value because no one really understood, like we were talking about, to the most concise one I ever had, and my manager going, "What in the world happened? This is the best thing I've ever seen. I know exactly what what you're doing. This is exactly how we can build on it, you know." So being able to find access to those conversations and really hear what's being said and how the conversations are going was huge for me, because then I was like, okay, I can see this, I can hear this, I know what it's really saying. Now I know I can tap directly all the way to what they're exact at that level is expecting as an output, and I know how I can impact that.
That's right. And I think what happens to us is the signals that we get from organizations, especially earlier in our careers, we might be showing up as the really unfriendly rock in the shoe, is stay to the side. Like, we might want what you have, but it's this special project or this thing here. But really what we talked to Catalyst about is you need to understand what the top 3 initiatives are for the organization and not be peripheral and align your value and what you're doing to how you're going to help them solve their top 3 initiatives or whatever.
Yeah.
I'd love for you to talk a little bit, because I know you experienced that on the journey.
Definitely, and especially with my journey being as a dancer and communications person. So what I saw as important was not what other people saw as important. And what they saw as important, I saw as ridiculous for the
Right.
longest time. So that year-end conversation was really painful a lot of the time until I started to realize, like you're saying, how what I'm doing actually does drive the outcomes. So that took me being very curious
Hmm.
and looking at that not as something I resented, because I did. I resented measurement. I resented KPIs, all of that, because I was such a people person. I am such a people person. But I had to realize what the utility of it is and why they need that. And when you can see the pressures on the leaders that you're trying to
That's it.
influence.
The empathy, totally. Yeah,
Yes, and so then it really is still your same skill of empathy, but you're realizing what are they getting pinned to the wall for?
totally.
And how much are they trying to manage? And so that's a twofold learning for me. One, how to help them do what's most frustrating, what they can't figure out.
That's right.
And that was my strategy at every level. I would say, there's a lot of articles out there of how to do this. And I think the one Achilles heel to them is that they all say, ask someone how you can help.
Yep.
That's not a good question because they don't know how you
I
can
don't
help.
know. Totally. Yep.
And they'll say, you can go file this. You
Right.
can go copy that.
Yep.
And I had one that I had to stroke his ego and I was filing his publications in his binder. Okay, fine. But over here, I saw this other physician who was frustrated and time bogged down looking through listings and listings. And I asked him, what are you looking for? He was like, I have to find every fall, like a fall as an event that happened. And then I have to look to see if this is in the range of this and this, and I have to highlight it. And I said, hey, lead physician on this huge global project, you probably have other things that are very aligned to what only a physician can do. Why are you doing it that way? Well, this is how I have to do it. I have to go through. So I found his frustration point. I
Totally.
understood. I got curious to find out what do you have to achieve? And then I went and talked to other people without him knowing. I went to the programmer, I went to the stat programmer, the statistician, and said, hey, is there really not a way we can reprogram this list to already have this parameter and this? And she was like, yeah, I think I can. Can you try that? And so we did it, gave it to him. Voila, he's got all the time. And then I was a strategic partner.
Right.
Then
You're
I
the
helped
hero
him write that
then.
report, and
Totally.
I helped him
Totally.
see what was the meat of his, so I think those kind of really getting curious to figure out what they're accountable for, what's frustrating them, what they can't solve, and then finding the channels to go look for what's the best way. Is there a way to solve this? Rather than
Yeah,
say, how can I? He would have never, when I
totally.
did say, how can I help? He said, well, you can go highlight all these word falls when you see it.
Right. Oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And I love that example. Not, I mean, not that that's not strategic, but it might not be solving the whole big
Right.
strategic initiative that he was doing. But like when we teach the class, one of the things that we teach is like, as you're bringing people along on the journey, you have to demonstrate credibility and impact. And so like the ability to listen, the empathy, and solve what feels like to them a large problem right in the moment and a small problem. And then you're given the sort of keys to the kingdom. So
Well, and it's seeing the pieces to know, here's the thought process that makes it strategic. I saw the lead physician not having enough time to do what
correct.
everyone needed from him.
Totally.
The whole effort of hitting this 6 month and a 12-month
Yeah.
work in 6 months
Right.
time, all the other bottlenecks from that person not being able to hit it, the weight on him, so he
Yeah.
wasn't showing up at his best. The
Yeah.
relationships between those other people was strained. So it's seeing the impact of all of that on this, we've got to hit this in 6 months.
That's a great
It's
example.
not, let me look at that paper and figure out how to make this small task better. Yes, I did that, but the systems thinking behind it
That's right.
was that that's a there is a critical path. This is limiting the critical path. This solution can fix that. And it will peripherally accelerate the other things because they will be showing up in a better headspace with, more focused energy where they need to be and all of that. So they didn't even see it strategically like I was seeing it. So realistically,
Totally.
I was looking at more strategic than they were. And then that was a replicable solution for all the future submissions as well. So
I was just
yes,
going to
it was.
say, it gets people thinking differently about how they can do the problem solving too. Like you don't have to be in the room to unlock all of those other things. They're like, oh, if we had just looked at it this way, we could have solved bigger problems or
Because
other
it did take
problems.
coaching for the statisticians to even see themselves differently, to not see themselves as transactional.
Yeah.
You tell me what you need as the listing, I'll give the output with
Right.
no thinking as to what's that supposed to be accomplishing. Can I do something for you better? And through that experience, those statisticians and those statistical programmers and the peripheral service, internal service providers started shifting from a transactional, okay, I'll just do what they asked, to understanding what was needed and how they could deliver
Partners.
something better.
Totally.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
totally.
it
Love that.
elevates it elevates all the organizations. So ripple effects is how I measure. That
Yes.
never worked at the end of the year reviews,
No.
which is why that leadership forum was so important, because I
Totally.
always was, you'll never see the end of the ripple, but it is cool when you can see it over at least
That's
a
right.
window
Here's
of
the new
time.
ways of working that are disseminating across the organization and causing, creating efficiencies.
And
Totally.
sticking.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Because people like see the impact, which is, super powerful for people because it's solving something for them too. They can go to their boss and be like, here's what I did for the business.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. As we come to a close, I would love to ask you about who your favorite inspirational catalyst is, past or present, and why.
Yeah. And I think you had wanted me to talk about mentors, and we didn't get necessarily to that. I think I will speak to it briefly because for me, the strategy for mentors was never overt. It was tapping into who I saw as effective challengers and getting curious, just reaching out. What are you doing? What is your work?
Mhm.
And then saying, oh, I see the connection here. Have you ever thought of that? And then those types of people like having partners, but they don't have the time or energy to look for them. So when you can
Yeah.
bring yourself to them, and then sometimes they did come to me, like the CMO that ultimately helped me, she said that she noticed me constantly asking the right questions, good questions that led to solutions, whereas the majority of her people look for the solutions and are trying to come up with answers. And she
Yeah.
knew, at least because she's innovative enough herself, she knew at least that that was a big difference. That was really important to be as innovative as she wanted to be. So that was a way that she ended up starting to trust me before I realized I was on the radar, kind of thing.
That's amazing. And it's a super important point because especially as we're thinking about carving our own path through organizations, having someone at the C-suite who understands the value that you're bringing, that's not afraid of the ripples that
Yeah,
you're creating potentially, and can be that voice in the room that's both, talking about you when you're not in the room, but talking about your value when you're not in the room. I think
yeah,
it's super important. And it's like, if after a while as a catalyst, you can't find that executive sponsor in your organization, I think it's a good moment for that sort of strategic pause and be like, what does
yeah,
that mean for my future here?
yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for
Because I'll
bringing.
say she is actually the person that is the answer for your roundup question of who is the catalyst.
Amazing.
It's really because I know so clearly that it would have never all of this evolution in my own life and my own thinking and my own learning. I saw the world. I trained in Japan. All these different things would never be possible if she hadn't seen something and she hadn't herself been an innovator at heart and
Mhm.
just not know how to get the organization to do what she knew could be done. So she
Nice.
saw me as a person that could help get the connection between A and B, where she saw B very clearly and
What's her
struggled with
name?
the connection. Iris Friedrich.
Okay, we'll put a
So
link to her in the
yeah,
show
for sure.
notes, and maybe have conversation round two to get the two perspectives about what that looks like,
Yeah,
for the
for sure.
executives who are like, Catalyst executives that are out there, even Catalyst allies, and be like, look, if you can find and support even one of these people in your organization,
Yeah,
look at the impact that it can have.
yeah.
Imagine having a cohort of 30.
And she did. She had to go for bat for me a lot because you make people uncomfortable and especially leaders. I was able to get the broader organization to go bold much better than leaders were willing to. And you really, yeah, she was willing to defend her vision and my ability to help get us to her vision.
So
But she was
nice.
also able to educate me on when I needed to start pulling back, and that's something that reflective after being there, that's one of my personal key learnings is that I felt so much pressure because of I was in this isolated role. So I
Yeah.
didn't feel organizationally supported. So
Yeah.
I went hard, hard, hard to try to deliver the value I knew I could because I thought I was, so much at risk being isolated. So there's a lot that happens there. Whereas now I realize I should have given them more grace. Not that I should have quit because I always struggled with the you should let it go. That was the worst thing. But now I see it as now that you can see what they're facing and what they're up against, you can better understand where they're coming from. So yeah, I think
It's a
she
super fine
was
line.
critical.
Yeah, we talk about it in class. It's a super fine line between the driving and the empathy and the bringing people along. So also self-compassion for yourself. Like,
Yeah,
you were on your own journey and we do the
yes,
best that we can.
for
And the
sure.
drive is something that organizations profit from. So yeah,
Yeah.
Elizabeth, thank you. This was such an amazing conversation. To all of the generalists and catalysts out there, it is possible to carve your own
It is
pathway.
in corporate, big
And
corporate.
honestly, and a good idea, because you get clarity on what you're, an alignment on what you're bringing to the organization. So thank you again for being part of our journey.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
And to our listening audience, thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to learn more about how to create bold, powerful change in the world, be sure to check out our book, Move Fast, Break Shit, Burn Out, or go to our website at catalystconstellations.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please take 10 seconds to rate it on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And of course, if you have other catalysts or generalists in your life, hit the share button and send a link their way. Thanks again.